at Mission Impossible. Tonight's presenters Ann Schmidt and Chris Ayers, and I'm Miguel Escobar again, serving on behalf of Episcopal Church Foundation. Just want to say a few words of what the Episcopal Church Foundation is. We are an independent lay-led organization founded in 1949 whose mission is to strengthen congregations through vision and planning, leadership development, and raising financial resources for ministry. We have a wide variety of programs, everything from ECF Vital Practices to the Vestry Resource Guide to capital campaigns to a scholarship program called the Fellowship Partners Program. But one of the most important things that we do is what we're doing right now, which is we provide free online education in a variety of leadership and financial areas for congregations and people who are leading congregations in the Episcopal Church. So again, just want to welcome you and thank you for taking this time out of your busy calendars to attend tonight's webinar. And with that, I would love to hand it over to Ann and Chris to introduce themselves and start us on our webinar.
Thank you. My name is Ann Schmidt. I'm a member of Transfiguration in Dallas. I'm the mom of 2 kids and along with my husband. And I work as a search consultant helping congregations in the search process looking for a new rector. I became senior warden in January of 2013, the same day that our rector announced to the congregation that he was leaving. So I have experience in being senior warden during, well, both of us do, during transition. I'm excited to be here today.
My name is Chris Ayers, also go to Transfiguration. I was the junior warden and senior warden year, and then came after her. I am fond of saying now that apparently my full-time job is church work and my part-time hobby is practicing law here in Dallas. And so I'm excited to be here as well, and obviously, like Ann, have family in our congregation, wife and 2 kids. So excited to be here tonight.
Let's start with prayer. Let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, so draw our hearts to you, so guide our minds, so fill our imaginations, so control our wills, that we may be wholly yours, utterly dedicated to you, and then use us, we pray you, as you would, and always to the glory and the welfare of your people, through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
You have been muted. Your microphone has been turned on.
As I was picking the prayer, I was reminded we prepared this presentation with a lot of very practical things in the subject matter. Your daily spiritual practice is the most important part of your ministry as a warden. And remembering, I firmly believe that people are called into this ministry, and it's important to keep your prayer life centered so that you can hear and be able to discern as decisions come up. So,
okay.
Hand it to Chris.
All right, so our first slide is meant to kind of serve as an outline for you of the presentation that we organized. So it really falls into 4 categories. The first one is talking about the roles and responsibilities of a senior warden in their ministry. The second one is going to be the challenges and pitfalls that you might watch out for during your tenure as senior warden. The third one is typical questions of an incoming senior warden. And then the last thing we're going to finish with are kind of our top 5 tips to ensure that you have a rewarding term. Again, as Miguel said, please feel free to ask questions that you have down there on the bottom right. And at the end of each one of these sections, we're going to stop and answer any questions that are put forward through Miguel. He's going to handle that. So I put together some similes that I think help people understand the concept of senior warden ministry. And I think it's important to understand everybody's role by way of governance and everything else. So think of the rector in terms of the chief executive officer of your parish. They're responsible for operational matters, staff supervision, etc. So they're on the ground carrying things out on a daily basis. Think of your vestry like a board of directors. Those people are not focused on operations. They're focused on overall mission, vision, and governance. They support operations, but they're not in charge of it. The senior warden's best thought of as the chair of the board of the directors. So he's responsible, or her, for interaction with the CEO, the rector, leading the board and being the public face, but again, supportive of operations, but not necessarily in charge of those on a day-to-day basis. So that's just a set of similes we put together that might give you some guidance about how to think of the real world that some of us are in, how you would apply it to the church world.
Traditionally, throughout the history of the Episcopal Church in the USA, the senior warden has been called the rector's warden. The rector picks the senior warden, and the junior warden has been the people's warden, usually elected by the vestry. Traditionally, the junior warden is the facilities person. I joke with some of our junior wardens in the past that you could tell who they were because they're the ones looking up, seeing which light bulbs are out right before worship. The senior warden was more the partner with the rector. But things have kind of switched and are starting to evolve in these roles. A lot of parishes are starting to hire people who can take care of a lot of the facilities things that come up, but also the wardens are starting to evolve into more a shared partnership. And that's exactly how Chris and I worked. He and I worked closely together through the whole transition. As I told you, our rector left, and we felt that we needed to have a 2-year plan. So I was senior warden first year, he was senior warden second year, and we worked together the whole time because we needed to have a strategy. But I've seen recently, looking at church websites, that they no longer have a senior warden and a junior warden, they have co-wardens, and that's a cool way to work. Of course, some parishes still maintain the traditional roles as well. The main role, number one, of the senior warden and the vestry as a whole is support of the rector. They're in charge of making sure that the rector has pastoral support, whether it's from the vestry or making sure they at least have a spiritual director or seeking outside support, that they are balancing their life well, that they're taking care of their family obligations, and that their family feels supported and loved by the community. And along with that is having a healthy life-work balance, that they're taking their days off and taking comp time for extra hours put in. Senior warden also helps the rector with as a sounding board, someone to talk to about potential ideas for mission and setting vision, and along with that, goals. Any staffing or congregational issues that come up, senior warden is there to listen to those. Maybe help the rector hone messages or help the rector discern directions to go.
So one of the things that's becoming more and more critical for senior wardens is to have a heightened focus on governance. I think there's lots of churches that do lots of great ministry work, but they may not be as concerned with the organizational structure of the church and day-to-day finances, insurance, etc. Are you observing corporate formalities? And I know I sound like a lawyer, but I think a lot of that is work that you assume is being done by staff, but it may not necessarily being done by staff. And so heightened focus on governance. I also think that lay leadership is very good in helping discuss with the rector as a senior warden long-term focus versus short-term needs. One of the things that I think is so great about clergy, but is also such a concern, is they want to do things now. They want to achieve now. They want to reach out and fix now. And so you've got to help yield some structure to that so that it's balanced, not just what they want to do right now, but where are we going long term and how are we going to get there. And then lastly, helping run and organize the vestry. Different folks have different strategies, and you should talk to your rector about who's going to run the vestry meetings. Some rectors want to run the meetings themselves, and some rectors want the senior warden to run them. In fact, our outgoing rector always ran the meetings. Our interim rector, he did not want to run the meetings, and so Ann and I basically were in charge of running the meetings during our terms. And our new rector actually has kind of a blended approach. So discussing who's going to help organize and run the meetings is important. Also, committee structures are important for the senior warden to kind of make sure you've got good talent recognition and to ensure a team approach. There's no way that all work can get done by just the vestry and just the staff, and so you've got to pull parishioners in, and you've got to even divide up the vestry at times to make sure that you're reaching all of the areas. And so the senior warden's in a good position to talk with the rector about how to set those committee structures up. And as I said, candidates for lay leadership positions. You should take your role seriously as the senior warden. You should help, go out to people in the parish and say, hey, we need your help. Hey, the rector and I've talked, and we'd like you to maybe consider serving here. It's amazing that some people want to hear and get some sense from other lay leaders that, hey, this is going to be okay and it's not going to be overtly burdensome. So that's an important function of the senior warden. And then lastly, distribute and source resources and information. That's true for both the congregation itself and it's true for the vestry. The senior warden's responsible for running the vestry, so you in turn need to make sure that all the vestry members have all of the resources and information they need. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But all of those things are the key roles and responsibilities of the senior warden. So pause real quick, and Miguel can chime in if he's received any questions or if anybody has any questions about those broad categories of responsibility.
We have not received any questions in the chat box just yet, but again, if anyone who is attending would like to ask a question or have, please go ahead, or clarification question especially, please go ahead in the chat box and type it in. The chat box is on the lower right-hand side of the screen. Otherwise, I think we should go ahead.
Okay. So kind of shifting to topic 2, which is probably why most of you are attending this webinar, which is what could go wrong for me. So what do I need to watch out for? Let's talk about the challenges and pitfalls, and they're broken down into different sections. So the first one are things that you might watch out for that could happen with your interaction with the rector. One of the things that's a major point of emphasis now is mutual ministry review. And that is just like the rector should be undertaking an annual, we would all call this a performance review, right, in our private sector world or government world. In the church, they're calling it a mutual ministry review. Essentially an annual evaluation of how things are going and how people's performance are and are they meeting goals and expectations. Just like the rector does that with all staff, it's essentially the senior warden's responsibility to make sure that that review occurs with the rector. And that can take many different forms, but it's important that you be open and honest, that that's an honest review, not just of what you all think as a vestry and as a senior warden of how the rector's doing, but also it's important for the rector to be able to give his or her opinion about what they're getting and not getting and what their needs are, how they are or not being met. We put on here that I think it's important, if you can, to use an outside facilitator to have those types of conversations. Those are just obviously very touchy, difficult conversations if you feel like things aren't going well in a certain direction or if things need to be pivoted. So give that some consideration if you have that option. And it could be reaching out to someone in the diocese to help you if you can't use just an outside consultant. If you look to the left on the screen in the web links, there's actually some information that's been provided there about a guide of how you do mutual ministry reviews. And so I would encourage everybody to review that great resource material that's there because the burden is on the senior warden to make sure that that occurs. And it can be a very useful tool to nip problems in the bud.
A second possible challenge is that your rector decides or gets another job or retires, and you as a congregation enter into transition. That's what happened to us. It's always a little humbling when you're told by the bishop that you are, as the vestry, are now the ecclesiastical authority of your church. Communication is the most important thing during transition. First, with the diocese, your bishop wants to know what's going on. You need to go visit your bishop and form a relationship with your bishop so that if you need his or her help or they want to input, our bishop came and visited with our vestry to offer support. That relationship becomes very important. Of course, the wardens have to communicate well with the vestry, and the vestry has to communicate well with the parish. And the parish starts to get very anxious during transition if they don't know what's going on. So keeping them informed is key. And another group that's not listed here is the staff. The staff, all the anxiety lays with the staff during a transition, because not only is it their church, it's also their jobs. And they're taking on additional work, and people are coming and going, and there's just a lot of stress. I went to a lot of staff meetings just to inform them what was going on in the church, what was going on with the search, so that they would feel like they were not being left out in the dark. I think it was helpful. The wardens kind of become the temporary CEOs, and the main responsibility is to make sure that worship happens, which is kind of a warden's job anyway. But you're kind of the top person in the congregation at that point. I wanted to talk a little bit about the vestry's role with the search committee, because I think this is really important, and I feel like we did this really well. We put some of our, when we formed the search committee, which the vestry forms, we put a few of our vestry members on it, including both wardens, because the role of the search committee is to go off and find the next rector, and then at the end of their process, bring that name back to the vestry, and then the vestry has to make the call, and they don't know the person. This is probably the first time they've heard the person's name that's being called. And so there needs to be a lot of trust between those two groups, and having some vestry members on the search committee helps. They can come back to meetings and say, I can't give you details, but it's going well, we have great candidates, and reassure them so that when it's time to make the calls, they've been a part of the process. The other piece of that is that having vestry members on the search committee, they often are able to address issues that search committee members may not even know about. They can confidentially talk with the candidates about. So it's really important to focus in on making, these are just important practices in any organization, is to make sure staff, the ministry reviews actually happen, and that they're documented. This helps you down the line if there's any kind of legal issue. It's very good for the staff's morale to occasionally get some feedback that they're doing a great job. So it's the clergy's job, rector's job, but you want to make sure that that's happening. You want to make sure that people are being accountable, and that's at all levels of the congregation, and support the rector in developing that, and that can occur in many ways, but just making sure that people are getting feedback, for the jobs that they're doing, making sure that they know what their job is supposed to be. I'm primarily talking about volunteers. Sometimes they don't have a clue and need support, but to be held accountable for what they're doing as well. Encourage candor and deadlines. be strategic in any kind of process. If changes are being made, make sure that you're documenting along the way so that you can see what's working and not. Kind of project management, really. And be there to help. Be, boots on the ground. There was some times when our interim rector had to have some really difficult conversations with staff, and he obviously felt uncomfortable. Chris and I sat in some of those meetings just as support for both parties and just to be a third-party moderator if needed.
And that's also true, by the way, it's not on this slide, but we sat in on certain meetings with parishioners who were dissatisfied, which I think is also equally important, not just to support the rector with the staff, but if there are parishioner concerns. So the last point on this staff issue is you need to remember that you're responsible as the senior warden and the head of the vestry to take care of the entire congregation. And one concept of that is making sure that you're being good stewards of the money that people are contributing to the parish. Clergy don't like conflict. They don't like having to put parameters on people. They don't like enforcing discipline or imposing discipline. Things that occur in the everyday real world are foreign concepts to clergy whose primary focus is being pastoral to individuals. You need to remember that's what you're dealing with, and remind them that we have obligations here to take care of the money that's being given, and we can't waste it on staff that may not be doing what needs to be done to supply the ministry to the congregation. On that point, too, I would also say about taking care and being responsible to the entire congregation. As to the staff, just like Ann was talking about how important it is to communicate when we were having a rector transition, the same thing is true if you have a staff transition. You need to make sure that the rector and the vestry are being transparent, they are being honest, they're being candid and open with the congregation about staff changes. We were very big about getting out front on those types of issues when we had staff changes, and it calmed and soothed, a lot of people's anxiety and chaos. Particularly, some of our people were given tremendous opportunities, and when you present it that way, people tended to react really well to it. So remember that you have that responsibility to the congregation as relates to the staff.
Thank you. And just before we go on to the next topic, we have two questions to come up. One is just from Barbara Richard. Can you clarify what this mutual ministry review process is, and is this an activity between the senior warden and the rector only?
So there's different ways to do it. Some people prefer to just do it with the senior warden and the rector. Some people say have both wardens do it and the rector. Some people say have the rector and the vestry do it. Ann's going to tell you a thing that she was consulted about. She's not going to tell you what church of something that they want to do that we think is an absolute disastrous idea. But to me, I think it's one of those three options. It's either senior warden and rector with facilitator if possible, both wardens and the rector, or the vestry. I think the more voices that you have in that conversation, the better off you're going to be. But there's no specific, industry standard practice. And I think when you look at the resources there in the link, you're going to see that there's a ton of different options.
There's also, the more people you have, the more important having a moderator or a facilitator is. If you've got a lot of voices, and it just helps make sure everyone's being clear. I heard of a church that wanted to have groups get together and discuss their rector's performance, groups of people meeting in groups of 12 to discuss their rector's performance, and these are congregation members. And I didn't think that felt very healthy. So this is a healthy process, and as Chris said, the guide is there for you to read.
Thank you.
Okay. So we've talked about challenges and pitfalls with the rector. We've talked about it with the staff. Now let's talk about it with the parish itself. So I put a series of very simple equations up here. If you have an aligned clergy, an aligned staff, and an aligned vestry, you're going to have a healthy parish. It's going to do great things. If you have dysfunctional clergy, staff, or vestry, you're going to have an unhealthy parish. If you have gossipy clergy, staff, or vestry, it's going to be unhealthy. So think of it in those terms of any one of those three areas. I'm trying to put my hand where it's visible. There we go. Any one of those three areas is going to cause a problem. And it will spill out into the congregation. It's a virtual certainty that will happen. So part of the role of the senior warden in making sure the parish stays in good health is to make sure that you have this good alignment between staff, vestry, and clergy so that we don't have problems, and to squash gossipy people in the know on the staff, the clergy, or the vestry. And we put down here some things that you should keep in mind in thinking about who's out there in your parish. So the vast majority of people, if they attend on a weekly basis, they're going to come 1 to 2 times at most. They're going to come to a church service, and they might come back for one other event. The vast majority, and I'm talking 90 to 95% of the people, they do not want drama in their church experience. It's probably higher than that, don't you think, Ann? It's probably like 99.9%. They want to come, they want to worship, they want to have a good sense of community, they want to engage in some other form of outreach or ministry experience or formation experience and fellowship, and they want it to be nice and fun and pleasant. However, and you all know who these people are, there's a select few people who attend church every week, and all of their relationships and all of their life is based off of what's going on at their church. These are the people that can cause drama, and these are the people who thrive on drama, and the more gossip and drama they cause, the more happy they are because it gives them more things to focus on instead of themselves. These are the people that you have to, as the senior warden, not only identify, you need to go talk to them and ask them to stop whatever negative behavior that they're engaging in. And if they don't stop, there needs to be larger conversation about how and what role they're going to have at the parish going forward, because they will, if you go back up to the simple equations, begin causing dysfunction and gossip all throughout the congregation and throughout the staff and the clergy and the vestry. So these are the people that you as the senior warden have an obligation to help the rector keep in check and under control.
Communication is the key thing that the vestry needs to do with the congregation. I think it's the key thing to health, because if they know what's going on and everyone knows and it's available to them, they can't come up with stories on their own and start talking about things that aren't true. And I'll talk about some of the ways that we encourage the communication. First of all, we were in transition, as I've told you. It's the Sunday after our rector left, we had a town hall, and we went point by point exactly how calling an interim would go, how the search committee would be formed, how the search committee would work, how the new rector would be called, the vestry's role, the staff's role, and then we asked the congregation to keep us in prayer, stay engaged in their ministry, to keep our ASA up. And so we informed them, and then we gave them tasks, and it was really well received. They felt included, they felt ownership, and there really wasn't much. We really didn't have a lot of anxiety during the interim period. Encourage your vestry members to be visible. Have them wear their name tag. Have them go to events. Not everybody has to go to every event, but make sure that there's vestry representation at almost everything that happens at your church, so that people can have those conversations one-on-one. I'm so proud of this ministry, or this is happening. Is this true? Be available. We had an email address that people can write to the vestry with questions or concerns, and it just goes to the inbox of our wardens, but it can be shared with the vestry, and they can be answered. It's nice to have the senior warden kind of write a monthly article or summary of what's going on at the vestry meetings. Always publish your vestry minutes. That way nobody can say anyone's hiding anything. And encourage different groups, people in the church to manage the conflict, encourage one-to-one conversation, discourage triangulation, and be there to be an intermediary if necessary.
So quick funny story on the email address. So remember the people I was talking about, the drama people? So we had a drama person come up to me and say, you know, I don't understand why we don't get more input with the vestry and we can't communicate with the vestry. And I said, hey, don't worry about it. We've got an email address. You ought to write this out because we take those and we present them. And so I never got an email. And so I basically went back to the person 2 weeks later and I said, well, hey, I thought you said it was really important for you to be able to communicate, and I gave you the email address, so why didn't you send the email? And I go, oh, it's okay. This is kind of one of those people that if you give them the opportunity, most people probably aren't going to use it, but a select few will. The other thing that's not on this slide that I'm going to give Ann a ton of credit for that I thought was really, really important is when we had, and I carried it on after her, when we had key strategic decisions that were made in the vestry, Ann gave us a not a pitch, but a very specific, here's what I want you to say when you go out and people start asking you about it. Here's the 2 or 3 sentences or the 2 or 3 thoughts that I want communicated, so that everybody on the vestry said the same thing. So you didn't hear one thing from me and then something different from Ann. So when you get out there in the congregation, it's important to have unified, controlled message, and I think the senior warden does a good job in setting that tone, and Ann did an exceptional job.
Thank you. The other piece is that, of course, your vestry meetings are open, and you can communicate that people can come. They have to be on the agenda if they want to speak, but they can come and watch. I don't think we ever had anybody come, did we?
No. All right. Challenges and pitfalls. Budget. So we talked about rector, staff, parish, budget. And I'm going to hit this. Obviously, there's a lot of things on here. There's a lot of resources there on the left that talk about this, but some things that you as senior warden need to keep in mind dealing with budgetary issues. Operational budgets. Do you have the proper allocation of funds? Have you done best practices audit? Have you done financial audit on an every year basis? At least in our diocese, we're required to do that. We're required to submit it on an annual basis. Our parish, we were basically politely told by the diocese, and I think they were correct, that they wanted us to not do a lay leadership-led audit, but instead have an outside firm because of the size of our parish and the funds on hand. I think that's true. So you need to make sure that the budget's properly allocated and then audited. Look at growth areas, and are you devoting the budget that's necessary to make sure to see if you're growing, and if you're dying on the vine in certain things, are you cutting back in those areas? One thing that we found is churches a lot are not properly budgeting for IT needs. You need to make sure that there's a line item there. It's an absolute necessity, and it'll hit you hard when you have to do a major IT budget if you haven't been budgeting for that on an annual basis. On the capital needs side of it, one of the things that I'm most proud of that we did during our vestry term, Ann and I were on the vestry at the same 3 years, is we undertook a plant study, a comprehensive plant study of our parish, and I think that was started under Ann's watch and finished under mine, where we had a group come in and analyze our facilities and project out until 2025 how we were going to have to pay to fix, maintain, repair, and keep up all of the various buildings on our plant. It's incredibly useful data. And they gave us a schedule of how we would need to do it. We started thinking now in terms of how are we going to use multi-use space. So we, for example, looked at one of the buildings. We decided we were going to make it into a youth center, but we also wanted to make sure it was functional for other things, school needs, for example, and conferences. So you as a senior warden have a responsibility to really watch those issues and make sure that that's being done properly and being addressed. And then lastly, the age-old fundraising campaigns, annual campaigns, and then and projects. Is the time right to be doing that? That's something the senior warden can give very valuable insight to the rector. Do you have donor fatigue? And if you're going to do these projects, what does success look like? Our parish, for example, we I think did a good job on a couple of campaigns, and on a couple we probably didn't set the parameters right. And it's important for the senior warden to roll up his or her sleeves and get active in that. I'm going to have Ann talk about one of the other things that I think a senior warden needs to take back to the vestry and to the rector right now. A key issue is generational differences.
And there's a web link that can tell you way more than I can about it, but there's an article on generational giving. But that we're starting to see, and it's really starting to be studied in the church, that there are definite generational differences in the way people give, and you've got to set your campaigns to speak to all of that. That our older members, they were raised to give, and they just give out of duty, and they give out of habit, and they're very consistent, and that's part of what they do as a member, and they know that. And they have a lot of pride in it. Younger members are more interested in mission. They want to give to something that is doing something to help someone. How is this money going to help someone or transform someone's life? And that's the question that they're asking. And they really do not like the answer to be, you're going to fix the air conditioning or we're going to add on. They don't care about buildings. They really care about people and ministry to people. So you have some challenges there with communicating.
I also think that the younger people are now, I refer to them as a return on investment, ROI generation. They're like, well, what's in it for me? What's this going to do for me? And how are you going to make use of what I'm giving you? So that's a totally different tenor and demeanor than people in their 70s. That's not their focus. So you really have to take that into consideration, and I think every senior warden needs to be analyzing that in stewardship. We have on there use of former senior wardens. I think it's important to know that there needs to be a continuum of leadership, and there's nothing wrong with talking to senior wardens in front of you to kind of get that pulse about fundraising and what do we do right, what do we do wrong, how can we improve, all of that. I think the senior warden has to have a very heavy responsibility in the annual stewardship, and you need to use people who should have been doing the same thing. My biggest regret from my time as senior warden, and I guess our 2-year tenure, is that we did not get a standard orientation for new members about stewardship. So when people came in and they became members of the church, we did not talk to them about these types of things, and that it's not free. It costs $5,000 a day for our parish to be run. We need commitment from you. We need support from you. We need you to help us with this budget so that we can grow and go out into God's kingdom and do great things. We never developed that. So I would encourage you guys who are going to be senior wardens to think about that and to look at that piece and decide from all of this what process you might be able to develop in your parish to ensure some standard orientation for new members.
We're about to transition to some other material. Are there any questions on what we've covered so far? Okay, you may be typing. We're going to trust Miguel to interrupt us if we get questions.
Right. There are a few folks typing, but we did not have any.
Well, we'll get started, and you can interrupt us.
Sure.
I'm going to talk about some of the partnerships and the collaboration that you'll need to do as senior warden. The first one is developing your relationship with your rector. I assume that you know your rector, but you may not know them that well until this relationship begins. It's really important to go to lunch and have some conversation, get to know them, what are their priorities, what are they interested in, and then to clarify what your roles are going to be. Who's going to run those vestry meetings? How does your clergy person see you operating? What are they looking for? What is their dream warden? What qualities would they want? And to set those roles and expectations. And if you have expectations of your rector, then you need to state them then before things get started. I would like to be communicated with once a week. I would like to meet with you once a month, those kind of things. Set that up from the get-go. Also, your relationship with your junior warden. You'll be working closely because anything the junior warden has to deal with, you'll be involved in as well. And so just making sure you're collaborative and that you understand how you want to communicate together is important. With either of these relationships, there are certain things that are just really important as a senior warden. And I have to say that the first one, the major one, is confidentiality, that your rector needs to be able to talk to you and tell you things, and you really can never talk about them to anyone ever. And trust will come out of that, that they need that sounding board. They may have to talk about something difficult in their personal life with a staff person, with somebody in the congregation. That needs to be hush-hush. It's a non-negotiable. And you've got to be committed. It's a one-year term. I saw someone who has signed in who is going into their third year as senior warden. God bless you. It's a lot of work, and you've got to stay committed to the work. It's rewarding, but it is work. Really important is to demand an orientation for yourself and for your vestry members. Make sure that you know, as I discussed, talk with your rector and know what you're supposed to do. And I'll just tell you how we did it. We have a meeting, a breakfast with our new vestry meeting members each year. And we invite the new vestry members, the clergy, the head of budget and finance. Anyone else?
Treasurer.
The treasurer. And
the outgoing wardens.
Yes. And we sit and we talk about, we hand them, we have a vestry handbook, and it has all our rules and regulations in it, and we hand them a budget, and we have our financial people go through and talk line item by line item, how to read a spreadsheet, what to look for, what things mean. They can ask questions, and it's in a small setting where they feel comfortable. We talk about what expectations are for vestry members, if they need to show up, if we want them at meetings. If they have, our vestry works, we have our members in charge of different areas, and we have them submit a monthly report on how those are going so that we don't have to talk through it at every vestry meeting. And so we ask those to be in before the vestry minutes are put together so they can be sent out to everyone. It's those kind of deadlines and being clear about what those are. I have to say that the vestry resource guide, this is our ECF plug, was very, very helpful. It has everything you need in there, and we gave a copy to every new vestry member. It was my Bible during transition besides the Bible.
So one little quick piece to add. So Ann's talked about this, that you need to make sure that that's done for the new vestry members, and that's true. I would echo what she said, that exact same process needs to be undertaken between you and the rector, and I would suggest the outgoing senior warden. I think having a significant block period of time, and we're going to talk about warden transition in a second, but having a significant block in which you do exactly what Ann talked about. How often do you expect to meet with me? How often do I want to meet with you? What do you feel like you need from me? All of that, you need to make sure that you sit down and have those types of conversations. For example, if it's not said by the rector, you need to say, if you have any staff problems that are occurring, I want to be informed about it. If you have someone who you think needs to be transitioned out over a period of time, I want to hear about it. Sometimes those things you may think are implicitly understood may not be. And so I think sitting down and having that initial meeting with the rector and the outgoing senior warden to figure out that process is absolutely just as important as ensuring the orientation for new members. And I say that because we didn't get that. And I think trying to hit the ground running, and again, we're going to give you our tips on how to do that better, it makes it very difficult if the rector doesn't sit down with you and kind of spell out expectations.
Great. And while we're going into the issue of transition of wardens, there have been some comments and questions about this transition, which maybe you can just speak to during it. One is that there's one parish which is having a senior warden, or the person who will become senior warden shadow the senior warden for a year, and others noted that that's oftentimes the junior warden, and so they're brought into discussions in that way. So that's one issue. And then just the importance of making sure that whoever is going to become the senior warden is really brought into those conversations that are going to be really critical for the coming year. So it's really almost a conversation happening.
We're about literally. That's great, because that's exactly where we are. So I think this is used.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about election timing and the transition of wardens. Sounds like some of y'all really have rectors that are looking at far out, and that's excellent. We really approve of that. In our church, and I think this is the only parish I've ever been to that does this, the elections are held in October and not at the annual meeting. And our bylaws allow us to do this, and we have the voting, and because we do that, by the beginning of November, we have our vestry members elect. And they come to the November meeting, the December meeting, and the January meeting, and they can observe how the vestry works and what's going on. And that works great.
Suggest that they observe the vestry meeting, not necessarily be vocal, active, dominant participants in the vestry meeting.
I think they know what we mean.
And if you don't, and if it's the annual meeting, so then they have to jump right in, you can see in the slide, you might identify who is going to be on the slate running for the vestry and invite them to those kind of preceding 3 to 4 meetings and say, hey, you might want to sit in and see how it is. And if you do sit in and see, you're not allowed to withdraw your name. You have to continue on to the election so that they don't have the ability to bail out.
You know, another thing that we do that we didn't mention is that we hand out to potential vestry candidates expectations of what the job is, that you will come to monthly meetings, that you will have reports to do, that on occasion you may have extra meetings because you may be in charge of stewardship or some other area. You will come to a vestry retreat. It'll take 2 days of your time. Being very clear about what is expected before people raise their hand to say they want to do it is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I love the year succession plan. We were going to say, you know, in our parish, it's traditionally been the rector picks somebody in December, and that's the next warden. Having it kind of spelled out allows you to start bringing them in towards the end of the senior warden's term and start being part of the conversation and the goal setting. That's really important.
I would, somebody had mentioned a year of shadow time. At least our experience and the experience of the warden who's come after us, because I was asking him about this, it's a pretty intense year. It's a lot of time that you have to devote. And I think Ann and I essentially did a two-year term, and that's a lot to ask of somebody. What we do, which I think works really well, is basically come September, I think was what we did. You know, we essentially sat down and chatted with the rector and said, hey, you need to make a call or start thinking about who you're going to have. And then we kind of began orienting my successor over about a 3-month period of time. And I asked him, he thought that was more than enough time for him to have been oriented because he's already been on the vestry, right? He's hearing a lot of the things. He just has to get caught up on some other key matters. So I wouldn't say less than 3 months. So I think that 3 to 9 to 12 month period is really great and essential, and recommended highly.
And the other piece of that is it's not like as former wardens we drop off the earth. And I offered myself to our warden and our junior warden to say, hey, if something comes up and you need to bounce something off a situation, I'm happy to do it and keep confidentiality. They didn't give me any confidential information, but I did get a couple of texts. What would you do? Do you have an idea? Do you know anything about this? And I could give them some insight. I could also keep an ear to the ground for them if I heard rumblings or anything going on, so that they could communicate and communicate better. And we relied heavily on the senior warden that came before us, who was there when we needed some wisdom. So keeping that continuity is really important. And so that goes to meeting with your incoming and outgoing wardens. You really can't read enough. There's so many resources available. Most important is to read your own governance, the bylaws of your church, the rules of your church, and the rules that your diocese has, so that you know. They should be in a nice notebook. We give a notebook to all our vestry members with all this information in it. We update it as necessary so that they are current. It's their job to read it and your job to make sure that they do.
So if you look to the left of the screen under the Files section, with our Rector's permission, we have shown you what is an example of our executive notebook index. And so you will look through that document and you will see it has all corporate governance documents. It has all facilities-related documents. It has all employee manuals, policies, etc. It has any other key parish documents that are essential to having ongoing continuity within the leadership, and as Ann said, to be able to update. That was something that I honestly developed with Ann, because I'm hyper-organizational, but we had never really gone through and taken the time to put all of that in one spot, and so I was kind of the guy in charge of making sure that was compiled, and I brought it to every single meeting with me. And it's important to have that stuff on reference, parish accounts, for example, all of those things, your last year's budget, your ongoing stewardship data, all of that stuff, so that if questions come up, because they do come up all the time in meetings, that you don't just have somebody go, well, I think back in 1995 we did this, or I think 3 years ago such and such did that. Things are too difficult running a vestry to do that. You need concrete information at your disposal. So I would really, really strongly consider that. And then lastly, remember, you're a fiduciary. So as a vestry and as a warden, you're a fiduciary, and you have to act like it. And you have personal potential liability here if you don't. And so everybody thinks of this in terms of Safe Church, of something happens bad with some kid and those issues pop up. But there's all sorts of legal issues that are going to come up during your tenure as senior warden, and you must assist the rector with all of those things in consultation with your own chancellor if you have one, and if you do not have a chancellor, you should be talking to the diocesan chancellor when things come up. And so there are some examples of things that we were going to talk to you about that you might not ordinarily think about that are key things that may pop up. For example, assume that you have a staff member who is convicted of misdemeanor driving under the influence of alcohol. Are you going to let that staff member be retained on? And if they are you going to let them drive on campus? What if you have a school? Are you going to let them drive during school hours on campus? I mean, those are things that you have to consider. Assume that you have a staff member who may have to be let go because they're incapable of doing their jobs because of mental illness, for example. How's that going to be handled the right way? Not just pastorally, but legally. How is that going to be handled so that the church isn't exposed to that separation of employment? Another one that pops up. Assume that a very generous donor wants to hand you over a $100,000 gift. How are you going to ensure institutional memory of what that gift was for and how it's to be taken care of and how it's going to be utilized? What if it's for future events that may or may not occur? Does the gift go back to the donor? And so all of those details, it's your responsibility as the senior warden, as the lay leader of the church, to talk with the lawyers and at the diocese or in the parish and your rector to make sure that you have full good compliance, and so you're not exposed. And we were joking about one example is we here in Dallas are like, it's like if you put socks on a cat. They don't understand how to walk around when it ices and snows. And so we had a huge snowstorm, blizzard, ice come through here, And for the first time, I went up there, was talking with Ann, we looked at having to actually cancel for the first time in our parish's history Sunday services because there was ice around the main entrance to the church, and we didn't think it was appropriate to endanger people or have potential legal liability from somebody slipping and hurting themselves. So all of those things you probably give some consideration to, but understand that you have to make the call that may protect the parish or expose the parish from legal liability, as well as yourself and fellow vestry members. So make sure that you make good calls, make sure that you're carrying the proper insurance for the parish, and make sure you're carrying the proper coverage for the vestry as well.
Our last slide is our top 5 tips to ensure a rewarding term as a senior warden. I think we got this, most of the stuff that we've given you, we've stolen from someone else. So this one was handed to me, this idea, by our former senior warden. And Stephen said, you've got to have a vision and you have to have goals. And you can't have more than 3. And so we wanted to become more vision focused and less reactionary. And so we set 3 goals, and that was the goal for the year, that we would work on, that we would talk about first at vestry meetings, that we would put ahead of little things that came up as much as possible. And it really worked. It was transition. Our goals were pretty easy. We needed to hire a good interim. We needed to launch a search. And I think we had a debt we wanted to work on getting paid down to make us more attractive for potential clergy. I think those were the 3 during my term.
Facilities.
Yeah. What was yours? Do you remember?
Ann and I essentially had a kind of a decision from the outset that we were going to keep the same 3 for both years, just from the continuity's sake, because we knew we were trying to get our house in order, so to speak, for a new rector, and we knew what the big issues were, and we honestly knew they were going to probably take 2 years, and so we basically shared the same. We shared the same 3, but I totally concur with this. If you set 3 goals and you set expectations for what success looks like, you're really going to achieve some positive results, and it's the senior warden's job to make sure that focus stays on the vestry. So again, second one, I think you got this now. Communication is absolutely critical. You need to do it as often as you can and be as transparent as possible. Transparency is all dictated by the circumstances that confront you, right? If there's confidential information that can't get shared, that's a call you have to make. If there's part of the story that can be told and part of it that can't, tell it as honestly and as openly as you can while preserving everybody's, privacy and rights. But the communication and transparency is super important from the senior warden.
One thing our vestry did was, and you do this each year, is write a vestry covenant. And it's written by the members of the vestry. Everybody has input. And it's really just the rules that you're going to use, the norms that you're going to establish for yourself for your meetings, and how you're going to relate together, how you're going to work together, how you're going to manage conflict, and how you're going to stay accountable. And some of it, we're going to come to meetings on time. We're going to leave the vestry meeting as one voice. We're not going to have, well, I didn't want to vote this way, but everybody else did, so this is the way we're going to do it. No, you should say the vestry voted to enact this policy.
The sample one's over there.
Yes, there is a sample over there that you can look at. And, of course, it has to come from the vestry themselves because they are making the rules and they live by them. And it's nice to have that also at the vestry meeting so that you can bring it out and remind people of what they agreed to. And we had a rule in there that if you need to stop the meeting to have prayer, that you could do that. And one that I particularly remember was having it so that if there was an issue before the vestry and there was conflict over it or having a hard time discerning which direction to go, that somebody could say, unless it was critical, let's table it till next month. And I remember being kind of in a pretty tense discussion at one point over something, and we decided, okay, let's table it. And about halfway through the month in between, nobody really was that bought into it anymore, and we were able to make a decision pretty easily the next month. So just a little time and prayer can help. So the vestry covenant was really important to how we work together.
Number 4, know your key parish policies and governance issues. Again, you're the head of that vestry, and it's your responsibility to make sure that the vestry does what it's supposed to do within the scope of its authority. Just one example of that came up, during my time as senior warden or as junior warden with Ann, we had to do a project that was a $15,000 project, and we have minimum bid requirements if you go over certain dollar sizes, and it varies depending on the dollar size, how many bids you have to get. So had I not read through all those policies and governance issues, I wouldn't have known, well, guys, I can't accept this bid. You're going to have to break it out and do this bid in project if you want my authority. So you need to really pay attention to that stuff because it's your responsibility as the warden who's signing on the dotted line. So be careful to make sure you do that.
And our last one about ensuring an orderly leadership transition, I think we talked about that. I think we covered that. So our time is up. Are there any questions? Miguel, I'm doing your job.
No. Any questions? I just want to thank everyone, first of all. It is 8 o'clock, so if people have to step off, again, thank you for attending tonight's webinar. I think that is it possible to be available for the next 5-7 minutes or so, just in case anyone has questions? To wrap up? Sure. Okay.
Can I make one other comment real quick?
Of course.
It's a lot of this, and just kind of a concluding comment, this is a lot of responsibility on you as senior warden, but I will tell you, it was a spiritually transformational process and period of time in my life. You get in what you get out what you put in, but it's probably a multiple of that. And I found it extraordinarily rewarding. And I didn't know her well at all. And here 2 years later, she's probably one of the best friends that I have in my entire life. So I would really encourage you to pour yourself into it. And I promise you that it's going to get you closer to God and your faith in Jesus, and you'll see a tremendous return on your investment. And I would really encourage you to do it. It is a neat opportunity in your life.
You really get a big picture to see the gifts that are brought from the congregation. And I'm not talking money. I'm talking about how invested they are, how much time they're willing to give. You can almost always get a yes when you ask somebody if they would help you with something. It's very inspiring, the work that the congregation does.
Great. So let's switch to the discussion and see if we have some questions. There is a question from Daniel Smead. Did you develop the covenant as a vestry team, or did you develop a straw man for the vestry to start with?
We gave them examples of covenants that other churches have, so that they could see what it could look like and maybe get some ideas. But we came up with the whole covenant by ourselves.
But there's one thing that we left out of our covenant that I would strongly encourage you guys to do, and it really didn't pop up until later on in the process, but every single, and I saw some traffic on this topic, every single vestry member needs to be responsible for engaging in stewardship discussion, and by that I mean financial stewardship, not time and talent. I'm talking about in treasure. And to say, well, I don't feel comfortable doing that, or I'm not going to do that, that's not a choice as a vestry member. You have that fiduciary responsibility, and I think you need to spell that out in your vestry covenant, that everybody must pitch in on that, especially the wardens. And if you're not willing to do that as a warden, you shouldn't be a warden.
We did have a question about how the slides are accessed. Again, they're available in the files box, which is now just to the left of the chat box. We will also be sending out a copy of the slides in a few days, along with the recording of this webinar. Any other questions before we close out?
Good luck to you all.
Yes.
Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris and Ann.